The United Nations has warned that Earth is on track to warm by almost 3 degrees by the end of the century. That's despite pledges from many countries to cut emissions. A new report from the UN's Environment Programme says current promises to mitigate global warming are no longer feasible or credible, highlighting how emissions have increased again last year. It says drastic climate action is now needed to limit climate change and its impacts around the world. Let's get more from climate reporter Tim Schauenberg, who joins us from Bonn in Western Germany. Welcome, Tim. Just tell us why the current climate action and promises aren't enough.
Well, globally, investments in new oil and gas projects are actually increasing instead of falling. Emissions are increasing instead of falling. That leads us to be on track to heat the planet by 3 degrees by the end of the century instead of limiting it to 1.5 degrees, as the global community has pledged, which would have devastating effects on humans, nature, and our economies. Secondly, net zero targets globally cover only 80% of what is needed to reduce climate change to 1.5 degrees if fully implemented. And that is the problem. Most countries do not deliver on their pledges. They do not have roadmaps. They do not put these net zero pledges into law. They don't have an actual plan how to reach these targets, which leads the authors of the report to the conclusion that as time is running out, those net zero targets are in many cases not feasible or at least unrealistic and therefore not credible anymore. Just to give one number, to be on track with the 1.5 degrees target, we would need to reduce emissions by 42% by 2030 compared to what would be reached with current policies.
And why 2030? Why is this date so important?
Well, climate-damaging gases accumulate in the atmosphere, and once they cause the planet to heat. Once they're up there, they stay there for a very, very long time until they disappear. So once they're there, the damage is done, the temperature rises. This means to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, there's only a certain CO2 budget, that's how experts call it, left over. If we keep emitting as we're doing it right now for the next couple of years, this budget will be exhausted and used up quicker as we actually can afford. And that's why scientists really point to the fact that it's crucial to curb emissions drastically in this decade and not postpone climate action.
So world leaders will gather in Dubai next week for the start of the COP28 climate summit. But what's the point of more talking if the current set of promises aren't being kept, and no matter what we do, we're still going to miss those targets?
Well, that's a very good question, but I would still argue, yes, this conference does have a sense, has a reason to be there, a very important one. Even though the global community is far off their own targets, the 1.5 degree target wouldn't have been possible without the 2015 historic Paris Agreement, which was part of the climate conference in 2015. It's the only conference where 190 countries, big and small, come together and talk on an eye level about the future of the planet. And yes, particularly last year's conference was a big disappointment in terms of more ambitions and higher targets to mitigate climate. But this might change this year.
Thanks for that, Tim. DW climate reporter Tim Schauenberg.